Hey everybody, good morning. So they left it to me to catch everybody up since Jeff and Carl went first. So we're going to try to get through this quickly. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we understand as we go through this, I want to ask a question real quick. Can anybody here give me a decent differentiation between invention and innovation? Anybody want to try to answer that question? All right, Liberty, I see you in the back there. Yeah. So if you guys didn't hear her, she said invention is something that you're creating that is new. Innovation is taking something that is already there and improving it. And that is exactly what it is. I'm going to try to throw this. Is going to hit somebody. I don't know who. There we go. If you guys can get that to Liberty. Yeah, so that's what it is that we're doing. So when we were starting to talk about business operations, typically what we do with this is we talk about the tools and the things that we're doing. And I thought we talk about that stuff enough. And I didn't want to kind of do the same thing that we do all the time. What I wanted to do is talk about some of the philosophies and the things that we kind of implement as we're going through, and some of the changes that you guys see facilitated on the day-to-day that impact the tools, the way you work, and the processes that we're doing, why they come about. So the desire to innovate by definition requires change, as it involves introducing new ideas, processes, or products that disrupt existing norms. There's a key word in there, right? As you read through all of this, the word disrupt is for lack of a better term, it's a violent term. Disruption is never easy, right? And something to note about that is that as a leadership team, when we're looking at change, implementing change, facilitating change, we are understanding disruption is going to be a part of what it is that we're doing. And what we are trying to do is assess risk, understand the risk, and move forward. As we get through this, one of the things I think that we have some opportunities for improvement from a leadership perspective is conveying to you all the risk assessments that we have done and how we are accepting the risk and what we expect the outcomes to be as we're moving forward. And we'll talk to that some here a little bit. But one of the things to also note is it requires adaptation. Existing norms, staying and doing business the way that we've always done business is not a way to succeed. And we're going to talk through that with some examples here in a little bit. But one of the things that we're going to try to do is always move forward from where it is that we are today so we can continue to improve, we can continue to grow the company, and make more opportunity for all of us. So I was given the opportunity to take a training class on transformation leadership through MIT over the summer. And it was kind of cool. And one of the things that I would say that as I've become a leader, working under Carl, working with Khalid a little tighter, one of the things that I really like is the ability to learn and find frameworks and ideas that allow me to kind of better understand what's happening at an executive level that flows down to us on the thing. And one of the things that came out in this class that I took was something called Lewin's model of change. And it really took change and simplified it for me. But as you dig into the model a little bit, there's some really cool things that you can figure out. In order for anything to change effectively, according to Lewin's model of change, there are 3 steps to the process. There's the unfreeze, then you're going to change, and then you're going to refreeze. Now, there's some pretty interesting things. If you look at unfreeze and refreeze, there's 2 things that are going to be very common in those 2 pieces, and it's going to be temperature, right? Over here, you're going to have high temperatures that are going to create the melting, as you would, and over here, you're going to have low temperatures and a settling down of things over here. So you're going to have volatility here, and you're going to hopefully have a sense of calm over here. And this is where I think we have the ability to improve what it is that we're doing as we're trying to affect change. So anybody from a standpoint of Lewin's model of change in those 3 steps, on the unfreeze side, and I don't remember if I did the animations correct, but we'll see. On the unfreeze side, when you think about organizational change, personal change, or anything that it is that you do, what are some synonyms or some things that might be recognized that you might recognize that you need to unfreeze and you might need to change? Can anybody give me an example of what might be a catalyst of change? You can just shout them out. It's okay. What's that? Improvement? That's a good one. You recognize the need to improve? What did I? Bad habits? Oh, I hit the reflector bounce. What was that one back there in the corner? Say that one more time. I was walking away. Fix issues, right? I'm going to throw this back there. I don't know where it's going to land. What's that? There you go. Market adjustments. So let's kind of build this out real quick. So when you take a look at unfreeze, there's going to be an awareness of things that are going on. You heard us already talk about there's a disruption in the market. You've got challenges. You have an awakening to things that are going on around you. You recognize that there is a need for change, and you accept that you're going to have to change. So what happens over here is that from a leadership perspective, and even from some of you guys in your roles, you're starting to understand that there are things that are going on, and you're recognizing, man, this has to change, right? If you guys had been here 7 or 8 years ago when we were using spreadsheets to do PSEs, and they were sitting on people's laptops and they were changed, everybody knew that that had to change. We didn't know what that was going to look like, and Scoop was what came out of all of that, right? So we've seen a lot of this here. When you look at change, right? Change can be transformation. You can make small shifts. You can adapt. You can modify things. You can transition, or you can evolve. And then finally, this over here is where leadership can really impact or fail an organization, right? Stabilization, integration, normalization, and institutionalization. I think if I asked everybody in here, one of the things that would probably come up the most about the things that it is that we do when we change things is how we communicate it out, how we institutionalize it, how we train it, and how we get those changes communicated out to you in an effective and timely manner. So what I'm going to focus on a lot here is over here, because I think the culture is accepting of the change, but one of the things that we do relative to this, why is it not? There we go. One of the things that I wanted to point out is that when you look at this here, when you look at organizations historically that failed to embrace change, which these are all examples of, they cease to exist or they significantly lose what they had. Now, one of the things that I've done a lot of reading on, because of it being one of the case studies that what we read is Kodak. If you're old like Carl, Kodak probably means a lot more to you than some of the younger guys, because it doesn't really exist in the way it did way back in the day like that. But Kodak was founded in 1888. And their saying was, you push the button, we do the rest, right? So they had cameras, they were out doing the regular cameras. And over time, they did a lot of great innovation in photography. The brownies and all of the things that they were doing, they had the 35 millimeters in the 80s. They were innovating within their product line. But one of the other things that they had always done was they sold film. So they printed the pictures for you. So as digital started to come, people used to think that it was because they did not embrace the digital camera and all of that, which is actually not true. In the 70s, they actually had invented the very first digital camera. When you talk to the guy who did the invention of that camera, he says that they looked at it and they said, oh, that's cute. And they didn't really do anything with it. And then when they finally did adopt it, they decided to sell the DSC 100 for, I think it was $20,000 was the first market price of the first digital camera that they put out on the market. So they really didn't have a strong grasp of what it is. But one of the things that they talked about was, it's one thing to see what needs to be done, divert resources, divert funds to it, and do the things that are out there. But if you do not prepare the organization for that change, it is destined to fail. So there's all these reasons why they pointed at Kodak failing. They did go into bankruptcy. They came out of bankruptcy, a vastly different company. There's so much stuff that you could read in the Kodak. They actually had bought an online sharing platform before there was an Instagram or anything like that, and they rebranded it as the Share Gallery instead of looking at what it really could have been at that time, because they just weren't doing the right things for their organization. So they failed, and there's a number of different things up here that you see up here. If you guys know Blockbuster and Radio Shack, and all of these companies were huge, and they just didn't fail. Even Google, back in one of their early stories, there's some good stories back on the Google story if you take a look at how they didn't embrace some change for a while. So as we go through and we look at that, innovation, so Carl and I were talking about this because I told him how I wanted to do this presentation. I didn't want it to be about the specific tools that we were dealing with. What I want to do is talk a little bit more philosophically so we could see where we were all headed together. It was 2 or 3 years ago when Mike and the collaboration team incepted Olympus and started to go in. And then about a year later, Carl had challenged the practice managers with, what is going to be your Olympus? And we've gone through a number of years, and there was a lot of conversation, there was a lot of things going on, and I think that some of that effort stagnated. And I think it was Khalid that had a conversation with Carl, and the conversation went something like this. He goes, Carl, I think the messaging was lost when you said, what is your Olympus? They were looking to invent something instead of innovating what was already there. So we stagnated on the fact that we were looking to invent something out of nothing, when really what we were looking for was the ability to innovate what was already there. So Carl, I think it was last year, we've had some conversations over the past year of what we don't want to do is stagnate, and we don't want to try to create, we're not trying to recreate a wheel, we're not trying to do all of this. How do we innovate our practices? How do we innovate the processes and the workflows that we have for our teams to make us a better company so we can facilitate the growth and the movement that we're really looking for as we move forward? And in the idea of what all of that is, so one of the things I wanted to focus on, when I looked at Lewin's model of change, the free side of it kind of intrigued me, because for those of you guys who don't know, I've gotten really into minerals and crystals. I really like the mineral world, and I like to understand the science behind the geology of them. And one of the things that I've learned in the mineralogical world, there are lots of violent things that happen in the volcanic areas, in the molten lava and things that bring minerals together and form formations. But when they are cooling, one of the things that I learned is if they cool and they form at a slower pace, the crystals become more crystallized and they become more pure and they're much nicer. If they go faster, they lose their shape. They get a little kind of out of normal, and you get all of these weird things going on inside the crystal shape. So I wondered, relative to ice, when you're looking at a freezing process, does the same apply? So when I started to dig in on the Lewin's model of change, one of the things that I looked at was when you apply a cold temperature to water to freeze it, does a slow freeze do anything different than a quick freeze? Because based on what I had learned in the geological side of it, I kind of presumed that a slow freeze would have made things a lot nicer. We could take things on. But no, what is actually in ice, if you freeze faster, the crystals form clearer and smaller pockets. They are more pure, they are clearer, and they are nicer. Whenever you freeze slowly, there's times for things to break off, the formation becomes impure, and all of that, which I think is pretty cool, because one of the things that you guys see that happens a lot is we move pretty quickly when we're throwing change, and that becomes a challenge for us to communicate what's going on. And it is even a challenge for you all to be able to get used to the way the system sits in a day, and as it changes the next morning, the next week, things happen so fast and we're not able to get out in front of it. But one of the things as we look at it, when you look at Lewin's model of change and how it goes for organizational transformation, that quick change is a very important part of what's going on, because as you're moving to disrupt and to make transformational change as you're going as an organization, if you let time pass, the ability to change becomes harder, because the culture becomes so against what's going on that change is never incepted. You heard Carl talking about the idea not having a plan of execution becoming a nightmare. That's what happens if time passes too far and you do not execute change. I will share with you guys all that over the past 2 years, one of the things that has been it's been put onto me as part of my job role was to run the internal process triage. I work with a lot of the leaders and some of the other team members in the different departments to go through and identify where we have issues within process, and we try to identify the pain points so that way we can adjust our internal processes and systems to meet us where we're getting the biggest pain points. I would tell you that there are things that are happening out of those groups that are making a difference. But what I would tell you is, I think to the people who participate on the team, and I think Lauren and Karen are probably two of in here that participate the most, but Kwok and Robert. The speed at which we are able to impact change coming out of those has to be better. We have to be able to communicate that out a lot more, because you guys don't even know kind of what's going on out of those, and things are changing because we don't communicate well, right? So as we go through in the quick adoption and integration, that is not going to change. When you take a look at what it is that we're doing, those changes are going to come rapidly. They are going to come in mass, and they are going to continue that way. But we have to prep the culture here better. And if we do quick adoption and integration, one of the things that, if you guys remember, when Carl joined us 8 years ago and he got into talking about some of the philosophies of how he was going to lead, there were 3 key tenets to what was going on: operational efficiency, innovation, and employee engagement. It's really funny because of the books that he gave us to read. We read, those philosophies were in there, but as we were going through the change, I was actually, through that class for transformation, I was actually doing some different readings, and all of these 3 things were still called out in there. Carl was quick to tell us when he came on that he didn't invent these things. He's just learned them over a career of leadership and driving organizations to improve, that these were the tenets and these were the areas where he could focus his most time to help an organization grow. So operational efficiency, innovation, and employee engagement. So the reason why I put this up here is it's under continuous improvement. Sometimes when you look at this and when we do our QBRs and we're basing different incentives and different things that we do internally, and we're basing it on these 3 key areas, I think it feels like it's driven down to you, but what are you seeing from the leadership relative to continuous improvement? I think the innovation we're doing well. I think the operational efficiency is driving with some of the things that we're doing. But I think as we go through and we are prepping the organization and the team for change, where we have the biggest opportunity to improve is by engaging our employees, by creating a culture of understanding what's going on, sharing the vision. We have the ability to increase employee engagement by making sure that you have the appropriate knowledge to move forward as we incept change. And number 3, getting your feedback as the change is going in and making sure that we're addressing those things. And so one of the things that you will see that I have a call to action at the end of this, it's going to be focused right here. So when you look at innovation and change, these are some of the organizations that really took change. Now this one probably didn't age well, because that's going through some change right now. We'll see how that works out for them. But Amazon story, they started out selling books online. Now they are probably the leading online retailer of just about everything that you could ever want. I know in the small business that we run, we buy everything from Amazon. It's crazy. But when you take a look at that, Apple is a really good story. Starbucks. There's just a lot of really good stories. If you guys ever want to get into a really good read, Microsoft, Satya Nadella, when he came in, he was like, it was a controversial hire internal at Microsoft because he had come up through and that just wasn't what they expected him to do. But I watched him do an interview with Stanford Business School, and they asked him, kind of as he was going through what was his philosophies driven on. There's a book called Mindset that's pretty cool if you get an opportunity to listen to it on audio. It's a pretty good book, but one of the things that it really focused on is what he really did was work on the organizational mindset, not about himself, but about who they were and what they were going to be as they move forward. So it's a really good read. So when you look at this, you've heard me say a lot about what's going to drive change and where I think we have the approved. So I kind of listed these and what I think that we do well as we look at innovation to change and our key factors for success. I think there is a strong leadership commitment to change and innovation. I believe that we have a lot of employee involvement. You heard Carl talk about Karen and Lauren meeting with Khalid on a weekly basis to continue to improve the tools and the things that are being changed there. I think what's missing out of that is actually Karen and Lauren talk to their team consistently, and they're getting feedback from that. They're getting feedback from customers, and that is what is driving the conversation back to there. So that's a top-down kind of conversation where we're getting that feedback all the way out to the customer, and that's important to note. I think the organizational culture here, you guys have been, a lot of you have been here quite a long time, and I think the culture has been such that we've been able to facilitate a culture that is willing to change under the right circumstances. And I think sometimes when we get what I would call organizational frustration, it's built on where we have some of these things that we can improve upon. Monitoring feedback. You heard we keep referring back to the Lauren and Karen. It's just a top of mind thing. We are getting the feedback, the rooms that you guys have for the WebEx room. We are monitoring what's going on. We are taking feedback, and you guys are incepting change on a daily basis. And so I think we do a good job there. These three down here are what I believe are where our challenges are. Effective communication. And I've already told Carl coming out of this that relative to the role that I took last year that I was moved to, I think this falls a lot here where I've got to do. That doesn't mean that I need to take on making sure that everything gets done in the right way, but what I need to do is help develop strategies that the leaders that you guys have on your teams are able to understand what's happening within an organization, understanding where we're heading, and they are sharing that down to you guys in a timely fashion that helps you do your jobs with the least disruption. I think down here, where we have clear objectives and goals, I think sometimes because we don't communicate to you guys with where we're trying to go and what the overall goal of an existing change is, you're like, why are we doing this? And because we do that, we leave a lot of opportunity for consternation. And again, this is something that falls with me working with Carl, who, when they're having these executive leadership meetings and they're incepting these ideas, how do we make sure that you guys understand what the overall objective of the next change that's coming out, and what is the other overall goal and measurable that we want to monitor and provide feedback on. And I think this one down here is at the bottom because it is the biggest opportunity, is where we are the worst. I say the worst because I truly believe that. I do not believe that we train adequately and timely when the things are happening, and we don't have what I would call artifacts that are available for you to reference when you need them, right? So these are things that over the next probably 3 to 6 months, we will see programs and things that we will be working with other leadership team members to make sure that we are addressing to improve the overall experience that you guys are dealing with in the field. This is kind of what I just went over, just a restatement there. But guys, in closing, what I want to say is I think it's very important to understand that we understand that the things that we do sometimes create disruption for you all. It is intentional disruption, but the problem that we have is the disruption is not well communicated to you, so you guys don't understand. From a leadership perspective, the commitment that we're coming out here and the call to action I have is to make sure that as we move forward, the changes that we have that create disruption for you are communicated, they are going to be institutionalized, and they are going to be better prepped for you guys to be able to do your job. So when we talk about business operations and how we support the field operations, that is what we're going to be working on moving forward. That is a call to action, and that is what I wanted to talk about. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.